I'm painting the Flatiron on the Siphon Draw Trail in Lost Dutchman State Park, bit of a mouthful, and it's a cracking scene for a contre jour style painting. Contre jour, just in case you may not be familiar with that term, simply means painting with the light coming right at you, so the sun is usually behind what you're painting or above. It gives really nice strong shadows, dramatic shapes, silhouetted shapes, and a great feeling of depth. And this sort of subject works a treat in watercolor. The rugged rocks catching the sunlight, so you get bold contrasts of light and dark. You often see lovely halos of light around the rock edges and sparkling bits in the shadows. And I love the mix of warm, earthy tones in the cliffs and the cooler shadows that stretch across the ground. The whole landscape really glows with this sort of backlit type effect. So thanks very much, Steve, for the kind sharing of your image. Let me take you through the scene then. The rocks climbing up sharply in the middle with jagged shapes pretty much everywhere. To the left, we see some darker cliffs with deep cracks and shadows. They look very, very chunky, giving some drama to the scene. The big peak in the middle really stands out there, points up the sky, almost like a finger. It's a weird little protrusion on the top. Yeah, that's very striking. Just behind it, or just in front of it to the right, there's another smaller rocky hill catching some sunlight on the top edge, and just down that left edge there, well, there's a little bit of a ledge here in front of it that's quite attractive. Again, the rocks are kind of leaning the same way. Then coming towards us, there's another sort of ledge or shelf here, bit of vegetation on top. Again, those striking cracks going vertically down that formation, a bit of light hitting the top. Way over there in the distance, so we've got a sense of depth here. We've got a distant hill, and then rising up on the right hand side, yet more rocks, so another sort of finger-like protrusion there. Very, very dramatic, rocky scenery. Now, as we come into that middle ground, we've got some green patches here and there, some sort of more lush vegetation, little bushes, scrub growing through the rocks. Down in the foreground, looks like there's some sort of, I didn't know whether it was a sort of dry riverbed or it's some sort of rocky pathway, but there's some really nice boulders there catching the light on the top of them, and a really dark, striking one there, almost like a round, smooth boulder that looked quite different. Or that one actually might be a similar material there, but the others are sort of whitish light grey rocks, and this one's more like a dark shiny rock. And the colours change as you look deeper into the picture, closer to us. It's pale and dry with these light yellows and greys. And as we look further back, the rocks and the hills get redder and browner with deep greens in the shaded crevices, a bit of coolness as well here and there. There's strong sunlight coming from behind, so the rocks are mostly in shadow, but I say the edges are really sort of glowing, and the sky is of course a bright blue. We've got to keep it fairly light around there, which I think is the sun is way up above us, so that's the direction, that's where the light is coming from. And we've got an opportunity to paint plenty of strong shadows and highlights. I'm going to change a few things. Oh, there's a nice green bush here as well, quite a striking bush opposite that big round boulder. Let's come back out. I fancy moving the boulder just a little bit to the right, kind of there, and got to put a couple of figures in there. If it's some sort of walking trail, got to have a couple of figures walking down, walking up. I'm gonna think that this is a stony path here, so we'll have a couple of figures, not in the middle, but just maybe right of center, kind of in this area here. So move that boulder behind them, or somewhere over here to balance up that. We've got that green bush there as well. Assortment of these rocks and stones. They're quite nice to have them like sort of overlapping shapes leading us into the scene. And that light grey there, got to keep that. I'm thinking with my white paper, leave out a little bit of the white paper to increase the feeling of lightness down in this area here. So let's get cracking and on with the painting. Let me just run through my materials. Saunders Waterford paper, cold press, 15 by 11, tape down, slight slope on the board, paints on the right hand side, a normal palette of colours from Mark Chapman in the UK, professional grade watercolour paints, all the information in the description below, and neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, spring green, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, light red, cadmium orange, cadmium yellow, and a few gouache paints down the bottom right hand corner, and lavender as well. I'm drawing, of course, the main shapes of those mountains, starting with the focal point of that striking, the tallest one in the middle, trying to get that place right in the scene. Not too, I think the thing with this, when you've got a high peak like this, or if I was doing a cityscape with high tower or church with a tall steeple, you want to try and think where the tallest point is going to be, and then make sure there's enough space above that before you hit the top of your paper. You don't want to start drawing the rocks and you're going up with the tall pointy bit, and then you run out of space, you run out of paper at the top. So start with the point and then work my way down, trying to imagine it in my mind. Coming further down, the different layers and my feature boulder here, that darkish greyish boulder, and then there's another one on the left hand side, just a little bit of crosshatch shading to just guide me as regards the shadow this side of those boulders, and the right hand side, one or two more boulders over there. So just continuing that theme of this rocky stretch. A few more boulders just in front of my main one. Again, just a little bit of crosshatch shading just to indicate where the shadow, the shady side of that's going to be. Continue this on down to the right hand side. This path, I'll call it a pathway. This pathway down to the right hand side. Here's my bright green scrubby thing in the middle. Not sure what it is. Also, what was attractive to the actual scene was this kind of V shape where we're looking up through almost like a valley, and we've got slopes coming down from the left and slopes coming down from the right. I think that's quite attractive from a composition point of view as well. It's a little, just enforce the gradient here just coming down with all of that, these pockmarked green lumps of more lush vegetation in amongst the dry grasses. Just really now thinking about other important elements, key shrubs, clumps of grasses. Drawing done. I'm now going to dampen mainly the top part of the scene to make sure I get a nice sort of smooth wash for the sky, and also to help me get that brightness in the middle, but get a little bit darker left and right with the sky, the value of the sky. So light in the middle, sort of silhouetting the peaks there in the middle, and then a bit darker left and right. Mop brush is a Tintoretto synthetic mop brush, series 1407, size 6, and a fairly strong mixture. Of course, as you know, in watercolor it's going to dry a little bit lighter, so I compensate by going in a bit darker than I think, and try and make sure that's the right kind of intensity for this sky. Don't want to go too dark with the sky, because we're looking into the sun. Not sure what time of day it is. I should imagine it's sort of late morning or early afternoon, around that midday. So the sun is way up high, but we want to keep that sky fairly light, and don't mind either side of the brightness going a little bit blue. So me dampening the surface of the paper should really help in getting a nice smooth wash with that sky. And I've gone over the mountains as well, because they're going to be darker than the sky, so no need to carefully paint around those at all. Coming down now into my background hills, or the middle ground, almost the middle ground area, with the start of a little bit of greenery. In the distance, I want to keep that fairly cool with the green, and a classic cool green, of course, is Viridian green, mixed with a little bit of spring green, just to go a little bit brighter as I come closer to me. And this will be pretty much, in a lot of the areas, this will pretty much be the end colour of a lot of this grassy meadow, if I can call it that, this grassy meadow. Apart from obviously the green shrubs dotted around the place, and a bit of, might need to go a little bit stronger with the greens in the distance. So generally going a bit stronger with the greens as I'm coming to me. And I find this sort of, the way I'm just dabbing at the surface, that could help me with defining the rough areas of vegetation. So different intensities of ratios of pigment to water, and then using that kind of dabbing approach on the surface can help create softish sort of shapes of different bits of grasses and clumps of shrubs and so on. Going a little bit warmer now, and I'm trying to, looking at my source photo, trying to get the feeling of these dry grasses, that sort of yellowy, browny feeling to that area. Quite a big area. I mean, it's almost half of the scene are all these grasses. So I want to try and get that value, that colour right. See, just dabbing the surface, and then resist the temptation to go back in. Because if I go back in, then I might just ruin the effect of these sort of blobs of paint. Yellow ochre. Dabbing in different directions. Doesn't matter if there's little bits of paper left unpainted. That could be a little rock or something shining in the distance, or a bit of vegetation catching the light. Cerulean blue, yellow ochre. There are in a few places just a little bit of coolness. Now I'm painting around my feature boulder here, and just carefully going around the edge. That boulder, try not to make it too, if you have a go at this, trying to make it too circular, try and make it natural looking, get a nice hard edge around it as well. Continue on down in this bottom left corner, all the way to the bottom. Really, I'm covering pretty much the whole scene here with this first wash, except my feature boulder and this sort of pathway, this trail going down into that bottom right corner. I like the way also, just on the left-hand side of the path, the scrubby grasses, they get lower and they sort of curve down into, I'm not sure if there's a sort of drainage ditch or something like that on the left-hand side of the path, but it's quite nice the way it sort of curves down into the edge of the pathway. Similarly, on the right-hand side, there's different clumps of grasses meeting that right-hand edge. Bit of cerulean. And create some of the shady side of these boulders along that pathway with a sort of light bluey grey. Not too dark at this stage. We can always go a little bit darker for the deeper recesses of the shadow behind these boulders, but just a little bit of initial shadow to define these overlapping shapes of boulders. Again, the mop brush is quite a good brush for this. The shape of the brush, the point, the edge, just the ideal brush to get these shapes. And this is where the drawing of those key boulders does help, and also that little bit of cross hatching as well, just so I know where to drop in the shady values. Now, my initial bit of shadow on the main boulder, but it's going to eventually go, or have to go a lot darker than this. Just paint around the boulder in front of it, trying to think of these overlapping shapes. Another little one lying on its side in front of that, then a key one down that bottom right hand corner. A lot of this pathway is going to remain the white paper, and just a few little dots and marks here and there to create the impression of little stones and these bigger boulders. I was trying to think of some key reasons why painting contre jour is quite popular, quite a common thing to do, particularly with watercolor. And the first thing, obviously, with Steve's source photo, we've got these amazing rich shadows and highlights that we can get without too much effort. When the sun's behind your subject, then big areas fall into shadow. We've got kind of these large silhouetted shapes giving us some drama. And I generally use neutral tint, as you may know, or you can use Payne's Grey if you haven't got neutral tint. A lot of people actually ask me what is neutral tint. It's a sort of dark charcoal grey sort of pigment colour. So neutral tint, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue for all the dark bits. You don't need to sort of fuss with lots of detail up there on those mountains. And then for the bright sunlit parts, we can use lighter colours. I typically would have a little bit of white gouache, maybe possibly with a little bit of yellow, or a little bit of yellow ochre, or ideally for larger areas, just leave the paper unpainted, as I'm doing with the pathway. And the contrast between the light areas and the dark areas really makes things pop. And with watercolor, it just makes it so much easier. When the light is behind you, so the complete opposite to contre jour, that's when things are a little bit more difficult, particularly in a street scene or with figures, and then their shadow is the objects are obscure in their shadow, and it makes it really difficult with figures in a street scene. And the other thing is, as well, is that you can get a lot of sort of middle values that the complete opposite of this mountainous scene here. Lots of sort of values in that middle range. So nothing really light, nothing really dark, and it's all a bit sort of samey and a bit boring. So we want to try and get those contrasts and these rich shadows and nice highlights. Now for a little bit of the background and that real distant peak, that sort of conical shape way over there in the distance. And it's got to be cooler, lighter, a lighter in value than the rest of the scene. There's a bit of a shadow coming across it. So, and that shadow's got a soft edge. So I want to make sure this distant peak is light on the left. Again, I'm sticking with my mop brush. I just find, well, I'm going to be painting probably most of the painting with this mop brush. And then as we come towards us, veering into this cooler green again, essentially going up this right-hand side, the cliffs on the right-hand side, and then they'll have those darker rocks on top of them. Using the flat edge of my brush now, and we'll go way up to the top with this. In between the rocks, there's this nice sort of cool green color, so the rocks are going to be darker on top of those. A little bit of greenery here coming closer to me. Well, there's patches of light green and dark greens where I guess the angle of the land is maybe directed more towards the light, and then it just gets a little bit lighter. Now, while it's still damp, that background mountain, I'm just gently lifting off the actual left-hand side a bit more, and also the wash was just starting to bleed into the sky a bit. So where I spotted it, just gently press down with a tissue and then lift off, and hopefully I should get my light back again. That bit of contrast again, a bit of a slightly harder edge, well, not too hard, there on that left hand side of that distant peak. Now over to the left hand side, sweeping down from those distant peaks, again this cooler green that's going to have interspersed with little bits of rock, and it's coming down into this middle area, sweeping down into the middle. Got that kind of gradient coming down from the left, gradient coming down from the right. Now, while my grasses in the foreground area, it's still a little bit damp, I'm going in darker with my flat brush, a little flat brush, and just creating a bit of soft shadow, trying to now enhance or emphasize these clumps of grasses coming towards me. And that flat brush for me is just the ideal brush shape for creating, with a sort of flicking motion, creating that hard edge and a soft edge with that motion. So just start where the shade is, just flick it up, and I get that hard edge followed by a soft edge. So this is just a little bit darker with the values and a little bit more paint to water as well. Not the brush, this being a small flat brush, is about 1/2 inch wide. It doesn't actually hold a lot of water, so a little bit more pigment to water ratio. And I can use my finger as well just to help things along, to merge things, just lift things off a little bit. Now I'll just flick up. Sometimes as well, as the hairs splay out, as the brush gets a bit dry, you can get that kind of grassy type effect with it as well, which could help when painting meadows and grasses like this. Now when I went in with my first wash layer and I was doing that dabbing motion with the mop brush, that sometimes can give subtle areas of light and dark. And me now, I'm just trying to emphasize that. So where I see a little bit of light, not necessarily copying the photo, but just looking at what watercolor did with my first wash, just sort of emphasizing that the shape, and where it's dark, just making it a little bit darker still to create that contrast of the light coming towards us and this the deep shade in between the clumps. A little bit more just to the left of the pathway. And these shapes will be a little bit larger as we come towards us, and that will help give us a sense of depth as well in the scene. Little bit of greenery now, these shrubs coming down that left hand side, going a little bit darker. not an intense green, but just getting a little bit darker. And another effect that we can get with this brush are a few dry brush marks as well. So where there's not much water in the brush, and with this flicking motion on my fairly rough surface, this is cold press, it's not ultra rough, but it's sort of medium roughness, I'm getting that nice texture, which could be very effective for vegetation, any sort of natural surfaces. On the left-hand side of the path, then, as I said, there's quite attractive lowering of the vegetation where it meets the pathway, and a little bit of a sort of like a drainage ditch on the left-hand side of the pathway as it meets the vegetation. Just a little bit more on the other side as well, I think, before I do the background. So while I'm doing this, the background is drying nicely and the sky is drying nicely, because I want to get a hard edge with those mountains. So doing this is just sort of filling in the time. Nice and light because this is a little bit further away, a little bit lighter with these light, shady marks. Just go around the tops of boulders as well, emphasize those. Make sure I go over the edge of the paper, not leave any little gaps, because when I take off the tape, I'm going to get a nice crisp edge to the painting. So it's beginning to look a little bit more grassy-like with the form of all of these bushes left and right. Now, background mountains, and this is where I'm starting to go in with the darks. Not too dark initially. Over on that left-hand side, there's a stretch of mountains that come down on the left-hand side. That's not going to be the darkest ones, because they are, I suppose they're a similar distance away to that middle bluish one I did first of all. Mop brush again, and using the edge of the brush, trying to get a natural looking top edge, the skyline, to these mountains, and then a little bit of a softest edge at the bottom where it's meeting the grass or whatever it is in the distance. Gradually coming down to what I believe is the Flatiron. Yeah, so other benefits of, other attractions of Contre Jour in watercolor is, well, I think trying to create a sense of drama as well. That strong contrast gives your painting a bit more sort of impact and life, and even simple shapes start to look a bit more interesting because of the way the light sort of carves through the scene, and with the the Flatiron rocks, the sunlight catching the edges as well. So I need to be careful here as I come down to meet the main rock. I leave a little bit of a gap, which will be that light, the sunlight catching the edge, creating a sort of, in a way, like a glowing outline, and the shadows just bring out those rugged surfaces. You can simplify the painting, and it still looks bold. It's what it makes people or a viewer hopefully stop and look with that impact and that sense of drama. So cobalt blue, bit of alizarin crimson, light red as well. We've got some lighter rocks coming down closer to us, coming down the slope, but not too dark. Lift out. If I've gone too dark, I'll lift it out with paper tissue or a damp brush. Would be just as good. Alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, not too dark, and then enforcing this kind of gradient coming down into the valley. A few little sort of rocky outcrops, and that's going to connect nicely with my main Flatiron. Flatiron structure. So I've started on the tape, go over so I don't get that. I get a nice crisp edge when I take the tape off. Just lift off again a little bit of the background mountains, particularly on that right hand side where I think it's sort of just going a little bit, so it's going lower, and I just think it's going further away, so making it disappear into the distance by making it lighter. Strengthen up some of the rocks coming down, just dab in a little bit of extra colour. Try and get a nice shape to these rocks and the gradient on that side. Ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, little bit of cadmium orange for these main rocks in the middle, the main mountains in the middle. And starting up the top, I can just about see my pencil marks showing through, starting with that odd little protrusion at the top of this finger-like structure. Nice and dark at the top, so we've got that maximum contrast. And then just picking up, as I go down, picking up extra colour, so a cadmium orange, go nice and warm. That warmth is going to bring it forwards. Left-hand side, just keeping that tiny gap there on the left. That's my edge that's catching the light on that side. Continue over, gradually working our way down. Again, like the meadow, doesn't matter if I leave little bits unpainted. It could be tiny bits of rock just catching some light. Now on this side, it comes down and there's this next rock in front of it, that it too, the left-hand edge is catching a bit of light, and there's horizontal shelves and things catching the light as well in front of that. So just leave that little bit of a gap there. And now continue on down. I'll get a little bit darker as I come down onto the valley floor. Burnt umber, neutral tint to go really dark with the base, and a bit thicker as well, so less water now. And I'm negatively painting around some of the nearer, lower rocks that have got a bit of grass or whatever growing on top of them. So that's defining that edge a little bit, coming down with the bottom of those mounts. And there's this sort of deep V-shape ravine where it gets really dark, and then we're gradually meeting the next rock along. While that rock is still damp, I can drop in darker, thicker pigment just to get some soft shadows in there, so it's not too sort of flat looking. We're starting to create the texture of those deeper vertical cracks. And then this next little formation coming down towards us with that grassy top. Enforcing that gradient coming down into the valley. So these sort of soft and hard edges, watercolor really suits this contre jour, because you can play with these different types of edges, and you're getting lovely sort of soft transitions in the shady parts of the mountains by painting while the paper is still damp, as I'm doing, and then when you add in the highlights after the paper dries, if we need to, with a bit of white gouache or whatever, those bits look even crisper, and they stand out. And I like to let the brush sort of bob around a bit, dance a bit in the shadowy zones, not sort of worrying about ultra perfect edges or copying the source photo 100%, just sort of letting this mop brush do all the work. And in that sunny sky and on the rocky cliffs, the hard edges, they help, hopefully they kind of show how really bright the day is, and watercolor is really perfect for creating that sort of impact of a bright day, and this sort of the twinkling effect as well. Next mountain then, with a few more shelves to it, sort of horizontal shelves. Start with the peak, which again is going to be quite dark against the lighter sky, and just trying to look at, this is where I am looking at the photo and making sure I've got the shape of it right. Try and make it natural looking, not too symmetrical as well, which would be a something quite easily done. When I look at mountain formations or trees, sometimes the danger is if I'm not careful, that it looks too symmetrical and just doesn't look real, doesn't look natural. There's my first little bit of highlighting. So light on the edges, light on that little ledge there. And that light hitting the edge has got to be different. It's got to have a nice kind of curvy shape to it, not too straight, narrower, wider in places. So it just looks a little bit more natural. And then the main kind of wall, vertical wall down to the next layer. There's kind of it's about 3 shelves coming down on this middle mountain. Almost getting to the base of this one. And pick up some neutral tint to get that instant darker value. Always try and mix neutral tint with something else so you don't get too, as I say, it's like a sort of charcoal grey, and you don't want to have your shadows looking black or grey. You want to try and make them a little bit more interesting, so mix it with something burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue. Nearly finished on this one, I think. Again, going a little bit darker towards the base, so it's sort of creating again that maximum impact of the dark against the light of the lighter object in front of it. This lower sort of rocky shelf. And then the rocks, they go down to the right hand side into almost like another little dip on that right hand side before it rises up to the right. Covering this middle bit now, not as dark as the mountain in the middle, but still dark enough to give us that contrast. Similar sort of colours really as the rocks I've been doing already, coming down into this little dip in the middle of the valley, and then going up the other side. Neutral tint, ultramarine blue. And sometimes when I'm picking up paint like this from the palette, so I'm using tube paint, it's not hard pans, and I'm not using fresh paint every single time, but this tube paint is dried a little bit, so I can lightly touch the surface, and I'm just picking up, just with practice, or with a bit of experience continually doing, you just sense how much paint you're going to pick up on essentially this dried up tube paint. If it is too dry and it's cracking in the palette, I might just moist it before starting to paint with a little light spraying or something like that. Now, mountains are rocky outcrops on the right hand side going up, these patches of rocks and then vegetation between them. and then the other sort of very steep tower-like structure on the right. Not as prominent as the main one, but it's quite striking nonetheless, and it's got a nice sort of balance to my main one. I've gone slightly more opaquish with this little stretch here. Few little darker stretches in the distance, and again I lift off with my finger if I felt the edge was just a little bit too hard. Cobalt blue. And what we're doing here is also connecting these different shapes together. So there's nothing sort of in isolation really. Everything is connected, mountains with themselves, overlapping shapes, the vegetation is all connected, again overlapping shapes, the boulders on that pathway, again they're sort of all connected with each other. So there's a kind of harmony with it all. It's all connected, nothing in isolation. Dramatic cliffs on the right hand side. So that's another reason for starting my drawing with the main peak in the middle, to make it low enough so that I had a bit more space for those mountains on the right. Now there's a few rocky bits coming down from the right, and then there's another kind of big boulder or something on that right hand side that also has got a bit of light going around the edges. Okay, now my next sort of pinnacle rock formation, then just behind it, there's on the skyline, there's some rocks going up to that main bit on the right, and then down to the bottom of this pinnacle, a bit darker towards the base, and again just leave little bits of the paper unpainted, tiny little bits here and there, connect with the grass below. I can go a little bit taller with this pinnacle, pick up a bit of neutral tint to get that extra strong contrast. This sort of bolder thing on the right hand side is actually quite warm in colour, so I'm going to have to go a little bit warmer with my shadow colour. Cadmium orange, light red, but my brush has still got some darker paint on it, so it's not too bright, not too light. Just create that shape of the rock and that bit of light. It's sort of like two halves to this rock, a taller, slightly taller further bit, and then a shorter bit closer to us. Gradually come down to the bottom and then go darker again. But with that kind of brush mark at the bottom, I'm creating hopefully a little bit of impression of the grasses going up to it. Just adding a bit more darkness here and there, and then we're going now with these green lumps, shrubs that are just sort of interspersed all over the, dotted around all over the these lower slopes. And that too, hopefully, is just giving a bit more interest to this middle ground area and the feeling of these sort of lumps and bumps going across. A few more down here in the valley. I guess down there, maybe it's where the soil's a bit damper, maybe, and you've got that lusher vegetation down there. Don't think we'll find it too much up on the slopes. And then bouncing up the right hand side, bit of a mixture, a fairly thick mixture of spring green and viridian green. So a nice intense green for these. And they'll need to get, like the boulders, they'll need to get a darker shadowy edge this side of it. Just get in the main shapes first of all, down to almost my key boulder. And my feature plant in the middle, which don't know what it is, but it's sort of a nice balance on that side of the path, bit of dark shadow on the right of it. But it sort of balances out that grey boulder on the right in a way. Continue down this left-hand side with this darker green. And then just need to now add a bit more darkness to the little blobs in the pathway, my main boulder. Oh, I need to get the figures in as well, which I didn't draw in, but I pretty much know where I'm going to put them. So first of all, this boulder here, it really is quite dark compared to the other rocks on this little pathway. It's almost like it's sort of being a sort of round shape. Maybe it's rolled down from, when in fact when you look at the photo there are roundish boulders all over the place, but this one maybe it's rolled down from way up high and it's just sort of settled in the bottom. Right, just a little bit more texture to the pathway, a few little bumps and marks just to create that feeling of the texture of those rocks. Don't go too dark. I might have gone a bit too dark in a few places, but it will dry a tiny bit lighter. Now these figures, trying to, well, just go for it really, putting in figure number 1 around about here. Start with the head, and I'm trying to think, ideally I should really have drawn these in beforehand just to make sure I've got the size right, but these figures will give a little bit of interest to the scene, an idea of scale of those mountains as well. Now, because there weren't any figures in the source photo, I'm having a wild guess at the size of these figures. And also, like the mountains behind, thinking of Contre Jour, they're going to be almost dark silhouetted shapes. So I don't need to worry too much about the colour of their clothing and so on. But it might be an opportunity to put in a little bit of highlight on their head and their shoulders, just to enforce that feeling of the light coming towards us in Contre Jour. Get the figures in first of all. Now, two figures together, I always try and make sure that the leg the leg configuration, they're not identical, so it doesn't look like they're synchronized walkers coming towards us or going away. So the legs are going to look a little bit different. Possibly a male and female figure, I don't know. But yeah, two figures, making sure they look a little bit different as regards their pose, where the arms are, the angle of the arms coming out from the body, and so on. A little bit of shadow as well, connect them to the ground. Well, my left-hand figure is connected to a little bit of the shadow coming out from that, coming down from that green bush. And when I've got my brush, just add in a few more little dots and splodges all over the place, just to add a bit of interest to the vegetation. Bit of darkness, as I said earlier, on this side of these clumps of green. There's it goes up to the right. Bit of darkness on just to the right of the pathway, just defines that edge just a little bit more, and a bit darker on some of the boulders. Then connect this left-hand side to the left-hand side of the pathway, just that sort of little ditch there. It looks a little bit lower than the rest of the pathway. Smaller brush, I've now changed over to a small synthetic round brush and add in some of these cracks, vertical cracks, roundish sort of horizontal cracks, or layers, if you like layers of a cake, particularly on this main rock here. Not much water on my brush, almost a dry brush mark, and just lightly going across that main mountain. A few more little verticals here. Don't want to overdo it, but just get in the main feeling of these cracks, and also with the cracks, not make them equally spaced as well, these vertical marks. Try and, well, just observe the source photo again if you're having a go, and get them randomly spaced. And some of the cracks are wider than others, and some of them show up more as well. We'll just put a few more on on the right hand side. Not too many on that distant one, a few more here on the closer ones. Don't need to do too much on the right hand side because that's on the right hand side. I want the main focal point to be the two middle ones, and then my warmish boulder rocky thing on that right hand side. It's got quite a strong one there, just there. It's quite a deep vertical crack. A few more little on the green shrubs. There are little blobs of darkness. I'm not sure if it's rocks or some sort of different vegetation, but just with this brush, this is an ideal size brush. I could do it with my mop brush actually, just with the point of it, but yeah, got a little bit more control with a smaller brush. Now, just be careful not to overdo it with these marks. We want to still have the main focal point to be those kind of peaks or the pathway from my bottom right corner that's in Steve's photo, the pathway was sort of almost in the middle, so I've just moved it slightly to the right. Just it sort of leads us up to those peaks, and not too much. Don't put too much detail. There are these tall, thin, dried vegetation, quite attractive in a way. Sort of greys and browns in there, and yeah, so a little bit of vertical interest, just little thin strokes. Now, I could use a rigger for this, to be honest with you. Just a few in there, and dot them around. Again, randomly spaced, not too perfectly. Not too perfectly orientated. Bit of flesh colour for the figures, not that we can probably make out what's going on there. Face, arms, possibly. Let's imagine it's summertime, they're wearing shorts or whatever. Bit more darkness to the top of this the left hand figure. Just make them a little bit different, left and right. Bit more darkness around that boulder, just make it pop a bit more. Few little marks on that right hand side. And we're gradually adding in some finer details now. It's that stage of the painting where I'm just sort of pulling it all together, back with a flat brush again, just to emphasize some of these little mounds on that right hand side. A bit more on the left as well. Dry brush. Take it over the tape as well for continuity. A few more cracks in this middle one. Just notice there's a little gap there. I left a gap just on that right-hand side. I think the light may be possibly just a little bit more to the left, but just cover up that gap there. And we're done. As I sometimes do at the end of the painting, just a little bit of a self-critique to see what went well, what maybe didn't go so well. My interpretation then of Steve's photo of what I believe is the Flatiron on the Siphon Draw Trail, Lost Dutchman State Park, and a great scene to handle Contre Jour. You might notice that I've added in just a few more little highlights with some white gouache, just a little bit extra sparkles on the side of those middle mountains there, just a few little white marks, lines, just to emphasize those glistening edges to the rock formation. And then also my two impromptu figures, the light on the heads, just a little dab left and right on the shoulders, just makes them pop a little bit more in this Contre Jour scene. Yeah, I think I might have overdone some of the vegetation a bit. Could have gone a little bit warmer, more of the yellow ochre yellows possibly for the foliage, just to try and emphasize that kind of dead vegetation that time of year. With the mountains, don't go too dark. I'm verging on being just a little bit too dark in there, but I wanted that impact, so it's sort of all right. But if I did it again, I might not go so dark and get in, as I have done there, get in some nice lavenders, cools, warms as well. Oh, the other warm one was the one on the right, that one there. Perhaps I could have gone a little bit warmer, a little bit redder, light red or something like that. But I think overall I've achieved my aim of the Contre Jour scene. Thanks again, Steve, for your lovely photo. And I'll catch up with you on the next one. It could be another Contre Jour scene. Who knows? Cheers, all the best. Bye-bye.